Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
So we are here for another episode of the Connected Campus podcast, talking with somebody that I'm very grateful to know that I think brings really awesome perspectives to their work across the entire country, a bunch of different institutions. So it's cool to get that perspective as much as it is, the folks who are, in the trenches on the front lines, working with students every day, kind of like zooming out, zooming in. So, we'll kind of oscillate there for our episodes throughout the show. But I'm so excited to have you on, Elliot. So if you want to just introduce yourself briefly and your professional background, and then we'll get to our topic today, which I feel like, I don't know, I'm going to be trying to glean the title from our conversation, see how to kind of cleverly summarize, sort of blending like physical and digital spaces. But why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll get to the rest of
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to be here, Dustin. So I'm the founder of the higher ed strategy firm Brightspot, and I'm the author of the book, How to Get the Most Out of College. So I'm working the problem of student success from two dimensions. I'm helping colleges and universities improve their facilities, their technology, their student services, and then I'm helping students and families understand how college works so they can make it work for them and they can take full advantage of all the awesome things their institution offers.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been really excited to see, sort of just like getting out into the world and sort of blossoming. And I was on an episode of your podcast that is associated with the book and everything. So I just want to make sure that we kind of gave a moment to talk about sort of the story, the development, the experience of writing that book and doing the podcast and everything. So that's, I think some new kind of creative ventures for you and it is for a lot of people nowadays that are kind of getting their voices out there.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. And your episode, by the way, was awesome on student success coaching. It's one of my favorites, and I don't say that to everybody. It's clear that you know what you're talking about, and you're good at talking about it. So I really appreciated that. And my story is I worked with more than 100 institutions on student success, whether it's, reimagining a library or helping a business school grow or redesigning advising. And I learned a lot from that. And I wanted to share those lessons with students and families directly. I'm in it for the impact. And if I could pass along what I'd learned with some, practical evidence-based tips, then maybe I could do a little bit more good in the world. And my guess is the average 18 to 24-year-old or their parent is not going to be pouring through the academic research on belonging or the efficacy of student services or the use of technology. So I distilled like 300 plus studies, plus my work with 100 colleges into 127 tips. And each one is, what to do, why to do it, how to do it, and then a suggestion from a student based on their, a story based on their experience. But, given that it's formatted for today's short attention spans and people can jump around, there's only so much insight you could fit on a single page. So I thought the podcast would be a great way to take a deep dive in each tip or each topic like yours on student success.
Well, I guess too, you're maybe getting like, because I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there is some sort of synergy for certain topics, but like, you were pulling together, research and your experiences and, things like that. And then like kind of almost like getting someone else's commentary on it. Like sometimes it was maybe somebody who you were working with for the book, but other times like you're kind of getting, like you're saying, kind of expanding on it. And even more so because it was like somebody kind of bringing in a different background or experience perspective to that same topic that was in the book.
Right. Yeah. My favorite part of writing the book was talking to people because, I already know what I know. And if I can talk to students or other higher ed experts, and then I can distill their work and communicate it so that more people are aware of it, so much the better. So for instance, I interviewed Randy Harris, who runs the Transfer and Returning Student Center at Portland State, and Portland State is actually majority transfer. It's an institution that's reimagining itself for the transfer student, be it in person or online or a combination of the two. Great insights about how to support transfer students. But I also interviewed some transfer students and talked to them about their experience. How did they adjust? How did they let go of their expectations, their impressions from their first institution, and how did they dive in um, or really jump into their experience at their new institution, and how did they use that as an advantage versus where was it more of a hiccup or more of a challenge. So those conversations are really great, and then that shows up in our everyday work with institutions at Brightspot, helping them help their students succeed.
Yeah, because it's just something that I sort of was thinking about, where it's like you're saying, where it's like, yeah, my favorite experience was like talking to people and all that. And it's like, yeah, and there's some like alternate universe out there where like you or somebody else wrote this book like as like a hermit away, somewhere else. We're just like, I know all the things, I know what everybody should do, and I'm just gonna write them all down and just sort of like kind of dictate to people, versus it being like it kind of like brings into sort of the like very nuanced or dynamic or kind of the intricacies of like higher education is sort of just like such a vast and diverse sort of experience, where like, yeah, you can have an institution that is uh, accommodating all these transfer students and other ones who are still struggling, so like they can sort of help each other, but like just all these different sort of dynamics at play of just institution types, how they run, the students that they're serving, what those students are struggling with, what they're striving towards. So I think it's like you have to just kind of like immerse yourself and kind of envelop yourself in all of the people who are working in the space, whether they're teaching or staff members or students experiencing it, or parents and all those sort of things. So I think it is such a, like, it brings that kind of the vibrancy or something, like one being able to have that in the book, but then like kind of up the ante and be like, okay, like now we're actually going to like do the podcast version, or like have kind of the warmth and the kind of personal touch of like actually hearing from these people firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's maybe something I picked up at grad school at MIT, where my background is in architecture, and one of the things that architects do well is synthesize lots of information, and it may inform your design, it may inspire you. And the great thing about MIT is everyone who's there is smarter than you. So you turn the corner and there's some topic you've been like dabbling in or just curious about, and it turns out it's this person's life's work, and they're not only is it their life's work, they would love to geek out with you about it. So like I had such a great time in grad school talking to people doing amazing things, and then that might show up in your in your projects, in your paper. And I feel like I'm still running that playbook where you can talk to amazing people, and you can be a dot connector, you can be a communicator, and you can add your own things to that. But that's a lot of what I tried to do. Like I talked to Dr. Terrell Strayhorn, who literally wrote the book. It's called College Student Belonging, and he's been researching this with qualitative and quantitative studies. And I have a couple of tips on belonging. He's got a whole career on belonging, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, and that definitely like kind of segues to kind of the core topic. Like I said, is sort of the harmony of physical and digital spaces, because certainly we had this global reset moment of being completely removed from the traditional physical kind of place-based communities of higher institutions, which for in some version or another it existed for the entire history of any of these institutions, which could be like hundreds of years. So I think at varying levels of speed, a lot of institutions are sort of going back to what was, but I think you're never really going to be able to kind of completely uproot all of the sort of digital augmentation or supplementation, whatever word you want to use, and everything. So we'll start with kind of the big question up front, and certainly with your architecture background and design perspective, and the work that you do, and everything, how do you see physical and digital spaces sort of complementing each other in terms of fostering student community and student success?
Well, it's a big topic, and it's one we've been thinking about and talking about for a while. And I don't know if this will be the title of the episode, but we always used to say, kind of half jokingly, It's not physical, it's not digital, it's phygital. And some people would really love that and they would resonate. And then one of my clients at NYU, I think I said that around the time when like large phones came out, and he's like, "Yeah, let me look that up on my phablet," which also didn't stick. So I do think like the future of higher ed is phygital. It seems like hybrid is winning out post and late pandemic as the winning term, maybe above blended or phygital or whatever else we can come up with. But I think these words and these worlds have long been converging. It's for several years now, pre-pandemic, 2/3 of fully online students were enrolling 50 miles of home. I think it's even higher for grad students. 2/3 of online students go to campus at least once. I think you see these intersections like a long time ago. 2U and WeWork partnered so that 2U students could have study space. We see online uh, institutions creating like storefront micro campuses. So there's a place for students to come together for an event, to receive services, to work on a project. There was even a startup, I think, during the pandemic where it was like buying out a floor or a hotel to create a kind of a dorm for nomadic online students. So I think these have long been converging, and I think for good reason, because a lot of the needs are the same. We did a project actually for Portland State where we were researching the needs of online adult learners, and it turned out their pain points were the same as younger students that were studying on campus. How many people want to go to an office to sign a paper-based form? Nobody. So if you solve for online, if you solve for student services for the online student, your on-campus students will be happy too. And I think that's really critical.
Yeah, and I think I say that all the time is like if you're investing in this and creating that like digital infrastructure, it serves all your students, not just thinking where it's like, why are we going to just do this for those sort of offshoot fully online students or something? And so like it's just a smart investment, and I think that's truly the best word, where it's just going to pay off by greater utilization by students, and they're getting more of the support they need versus like trying to make decisions in a vacuum or something, or going without resources that could have been helpful to them. And that like yeah, it's like I think it's even there's a lot of parallels of like people compare higher ed to like medical systems or to like government, where just in terms of like the size and the complexity, and just sort of sometimes where it's like, hey, we're here, it's kind of like on you to like navigate and figure everything out, like so anything that we can do to kind of streamline things or make things more simplistic or more accessible, where it's like, yeah, if I want to submit a form to get something done, or do whatever, having something that's available 24/7 or just fully self-service, kind of like digitally, so a student can uh you know kind of get in the queue to get support or track that request, or do any sort of thing. So I think that, yeah, like for on the student success front, like and there's like a lot of great vendors and organizations out there that I think can really help supplement institutions, and even having the viewpoint where it's like you may not even be giving up the right to like do that yourself in the future. It could just be like, hey, if you need a partner to like ramp you up real quick and kind of get you set up, then like there's options out there. But I'm curious your perspective too on like the community front, because like my thought has always been that like say you have a residence hall or anything like that, like, you certainly everybody on campus is sharing the affinity of being a fellow student, but like, you want to start to kind of maybe build community around shared affinities or something like that, and having sort of a kind of like digital scaffolding, and like maybe that's like the catalyst to get people sort of interacting, and then they may go eat at the dining hall together or go to an event together, or do whatever. Like it can serve really well in a place like that. But I'm curious, just thoughts from you of like other ways that like uh you see sort of the digital and the physical sort of coming in harmony to really accomplish the community building for students.
Yeah, I think, digital can be that scaffolding. I think it can also be a catalyst. I mean, I talk to so many students that met someone, not like just from a dating perspective, but like met someone, that they then join a club with, or they run a student organization with, or they found an organization with, where they met online. May meet through Instagram. There's a, they sign up for text alerts about a certain kind of event. So I think that like the digital can spark interactions and relationships of all kinds that happen in person. And I think there's also lots of spaces that serve both on campus and online students. And we also know that like those students are a blend, right? Like Brightspot's recent survey, as well as EDUCAUSE's about learning modality, it's roughly like a fifth of students want fully online, two fifths want fully in person, and then two fifths want some blend of the two. So the students themselves are phygital students. Apologies again for using that, but there it is. And there are these spaces that serve both, both audiences, both sets of users, like a one-stop student service hub. That's got a walk-up counter with a swipe your ID to get queued, and then you can get help on a registration issue, on a financial aid issue, on a bill pay issue, whatever it might be. But behind the scenes, there's also staff that are helping people in that, in a digital queue. Um, I think like centers for teaching and learning excellence, they're often places for faculty to get instructional design help, to course, redesign a course or an assignment. They may be teaching in person, they may be teaching online. Um, they're hybrid classrooms, right? That are maybe for recording a lecture, they may be for participating a synchronous session. And I think the big one, which is actually the biggest chunk of space on most campuses apart from residential, is the workplace. And increasingly, that workplace is for hybrid staff, certainly, and hybrid faculty for some, to some degree. And those staff are providing all those shared services, career services, advising. And rather than, I think, like the next era of higher ed, in addition to like to access, uh, we also have to make the cost uh, sustainable. And if we don't have redundant, one set of folks doing instructional design for online and another set of folks doing instructional design for on campus, or one set of folks doing career services online and the other for on campus, I think that you can have a more efficient model, and you can invest in these spaces and technologies that serve all your students.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate you just kind of giving a tip of the hat to faculty and staff as well, where like all these dynamics are at play of just their satisfaction, their success, and their community with each other, to support each other and all that. Um, and I'll just before I forget to say it, just to like, it's going to be like rattling around my brain. Uh, us here at Pathify also like our like blended words of like digital or yeah, so you're in good company. But so I think the one that I kept hearing is like custom and standard. Like if we're like developing new features, it's like like, oh well, it's kind of in between, because like we're making it custom for somebody, but it might eventually be a standard thing, so it's just like a custard integration or whatever. Like, so it's like
Nice.
yeah, it's a good one. But something else I was thinking of, like, because that's one really a good point, is like I've talked about this recently. It's like right sizing an institution, sort of evaluating your physical footprint, which can involve sort of hybrid staff, faculty, the spaces and the offices that they're using, where it's like we can kind of maybe have this be a little bit more fluid, or maybe it is just an awkward place, and it's like we don't, like, maybe we shouldn't be using that building anymore because nobody ever goes there in person. We see most people asking for Zoom meetings or something to meet with their advisor or whoever. And so one that I could introduce, kind of free yourself from sort of like being so place bound in a place that maybe isn't working well for students, and then like kind of flexibility in like when you're on and like engaging with students to get support. You don't have to just be like, well, the building closes at 5 so we can't be here, whatever. And in sort of the digital augmentation, because I would think that students would be more inclined to do this, is like if you're having like peer support, like so if you're empowering, students to be helping each other with like tutoring or this, that, the other thing, it's like, yeah, they're probably going to be more likely to kind of be like interacting with each other on Discord or Slack, whatever, like if they have questions or want to do something, and maybe like, you know, uh, again, at least having the catalyst to get things started, where it's like, oh no, we have our student worker just like sitting at the reception, and it's just like, again, they're just sitting in a place, but like, and maybe while they're there, they're probably, going to be better served like interacting with people, in digital communities or digital platforms. So, uh, yeah, there's definitely a
Yeah,
lot of use cases across like, all the different like personas, and then, the different like offices.
yeah, and I think I think peer-to-peer support is a great thing for many reasons. It's more accessible, it's more available, it's more sustainable. It's not a panacea, but one of my favorite projects where we very much turned lemons into lemonade was a building called the Hunt Library at NC State, where the state quite generously funded a brand new next generation library that has, it literally has robots retrieving the books because it takes way less space, and that created much more space for students. But that library was funded without funding any new staff. The only thing the legislature funded was an increase in the student worker budget. So we said, well, okay, like maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe we can make students the face of help, and we can think about students on the front line doing more than reshelving books, helping students with technology, helping them find the right book, having a side-by-side consultation, not just checking things in and out. And part of that was we even had to change like some policies, because there was only one tier of student worker, and you couldn't have students supervising students. So in addition, so we created a new service model, a new staffing model, and it was all about how do we stand up a new 200,000 plus square foot library without adding any staff. And part of the solution was students helping students in new ways.
Yeah, that's a great example, because I think like, you know, just this sort of conversation has a lot of depth to it in terms of sort of the implications of like, if you create, sort of a program, or like, oh, we want, peer advisors, to help, with one thing or another. But then it's like, oh, well, where are they going to work? Like, we don't have any room for them in our little like closet of an office for whatever we're doing, and it's just like, thinking through, kind of freeing yourself of that, of like maybe having them be just like really empowered moderators on like a, sort of a social engagement place like, Slack or Discord, wherever else. But then like, if you're doing it right, one, just sort of like how are they sort of set up to engage with their peers to give that support, and then like just generally trying to have experiences where they are getting like, meaningful, learning from it, of like, okay, yeah, like we're working in this library and actually like doing more than just like running to get books or something, like, and if it's like, okay, yes, I'm like a peer health advisor that is actually more accessible and engaging with more students, and I'm like building skills versus just like twiddling my thumbs and waiting for somebody to stroll into the office or something, like, so you can kind of like, if it's like trying to find maybe sort of a justification for it, or a way to kind of measure against like what you were doing, you can kind of, you know uh, kind of try to, survey or track like the satisfaction of the student doing that work, or, the usage rates, or, those sort of things, and certainly, also getting the satisfaction of the students that you're serving as well. But like, yeah, so it's just an interesting thing where like I think, there's, yeah, the community aspects, the student success aspects, and all of them are sort of like, blending together, because it's like, you're probably going to be more successful, with more of the community, and certainly all that, kind of sense of belonging work that, um I think is so sort of core to the higher ed sort of experience, and continues to be sort of expanded upon. But as you're, you know continuing to like journey into podcasting and having these conversations and doing this work and everything else, like what are you excited about for the future, with everything that we've talked about? If there's other examples of things that you see that maybe are just getting started, or just like stuff that seems to be kind of still really early days, certainly, the AIs of it all, like chat GPT is always a very buzzy thing, but yeah, just what are you eyeing on the horizon?
Well, there's this concept in sustainability of the triple bottom line that, that sustainability is environmental, it's economic, and it's social. And I think one of the really exciting things, Brightspot was acquired by a global engineering and consulting firm called Bureau Happold about 2 years ago. And they are really like global leaders in sustainability. And it's really made me rethink a lot of what we do and how we do it, because our mission has always been, how do you create more engaging and equitable experiences for students? But I think they have to be sustainable in all senses of the word. And I've got an article coming out with John Katzman from Noodle that that speaks to this, and it's really interesting. For the article, we did some research and we looked at this issue of sustainability from all three of those lenses, and it seems like there's huge potential for institutions to unlock the latent capacity of their campus, because campuses are pretty underutilized. Like, you can make some small changes to classrooms, to offices, and to scheduling. If every student studied one summer, you've got 10% more capacity right there. And if you made some small changes to classrooms, offices, and labs and so forth, you could have 10% more capacity there. And maybe you grow another 10% online in your same footprint, and you can reduce the cost. And interestingly, we looked at the carbon footprint of an online grad student versus an on-campus grad student, taking an MBA student as a case study. And the carbon footprint of an online student is about half what it is for on-campus student. So I'm really excited about a more sustainable future for higher ed, where it's more accessible at a lower cost, and serves students better. Because I think a lot of the things about traditional campuses is they don't work for today's student that might be older, might be going full time, might have kids of their own, might be commuting, might be part time, might want blended, might want to go slower, might want to start at different times. And so I think, like, we can increase access, we can increase affordability, we can increase support while we're also like lowering the carbon footprint, because we're using the space that we've got better. So that's that. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, like, I've thought about that, like, most of my freshman career, being, in so the online graduate student space, and just sort of like seeing where it's like, wow, like, there's so many benefits just for, yeah, like the accessibility and sort of, all that. But like, I've just not seen a lot of people focus on that. So I'm glad that like there will be something that's kind of paints a pretty clear picture. Because I've just, I guess, like, I've known that in my heart, where I'm just like, and it has to be true. So if somebody can actually like kind of make some sort of measurement to be like, okay, here is like sort of the support, that you're not just sort of speculating something that you think your feel is true. So that is really exciting. Because yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's the right sizing, it's staying lean, it's staying efficient, because we're going to be continuing to experience some headwinds and ambiguity and everything in higher ed. So I think as much as you can, stay flexible and be kind of optimizing, the assets that you have to better serve, modern learners and everything like that. I think, yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can, because again, I guess my mind is almost going to like kind of like justify, or like kind of measure and kind of quantify, these changes that you're making and the impact. So it's not just sort of people again saying like, well, we should do it because we're supposed to or something. It's like, we're doing it and like we're actually saving money, like through like, not building all these new buildings or doing whatever else. Or
Yeah. And I think there's an opportunity to change the conversation from less bad to more good. And I think you can say, oh, like, Google's got career certificates, and state governments are waiving the bachelor's degree as a requirement, and we've got demographic headwinds, and so forth, and all those are good triggers to be more efficient, to right size, But I think we can also do more good, because if you do those things, maybe more people can participate in higher ed, because like right now, I think it's 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds nationally enroll. Right. So if you move the needle on that, like we could actually create more demand and do more good, instead of saying like, hey, we've got fewer students, let's do less bad. Let's do more good. I think that's more exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this has been a very interesting conversation to lead to our usual closing question for this show. So, we're talking kind of just generally about connection and everything like that. So, as we wrap up, take this as you will. What does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
Well, I think it's going to be, I think if you've seen one connected campus, you've seen one connected campus, because it's probably different based on, the institutional culture and context and curriculum and campus. But I do think there's some really good principles. And um, I wrote in 2019, I wrote a white paper called The Connected Campus for Knoll. And the thesis of that paper, which I hope folks check out, it's a free download, is that in many ways, higher ed has been defined by its separations. And separation, specificity, these are good, and they provide some focus, they provide identity. But I think it's really the things that used to separate things like teaching and research, academia and industry, physical, digital, um, individual work, teamwork, academic affairs, student affairs. I think like the next generation college and university is really the one that connects those things that used to be disparate, right? That looks for what are ways that students can do original research for a class? Like, what are the ways they can do a real world project in a class that helps a community, builds their portfolio, gets them a connection? Um, what are the ways that academic affairs and student affairs can work together to support the whole student? I think that's really where the power is, at those points of connection between things that for too long have been maybe too separated.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to link out to that white paper that you mentioned. And yeah, it's just making me think is like, I love thinking in like metaphors and kind of visualizing where it's like, just like more bridges, between those sort of like impasses of, different even just like functions within a university or the university and its community. And the idea of like, the town and gown of it all was like, oh yeah, we need to like build some ladders up the ivory tower so that like just allow everybody to kind of like, ascend this like, what traditionally and historically, it just feels like very, like out of touch or sort of aloof or sort of disconnected and everything. So I think that's a really cool way to kind of look at it, because that is, like it's more access into higher education. It's more relevancy for, the way that higher ed sort of presents itself, what it offers and everything. So I think that is a great sort of final thought to wrap everything up. And just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did. And we'll have ways to connect with you in the description and show notes for this episode and everything. So it's always great chatting with you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity, and appreciate what you're doing to connect campuses and people and programs and places.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.